Harold Jennings thought he had finally found peace when he moved into his single-story brick house on Sandalwood Drive, just outside Round Rock, Texas. After years of long shifts managing a logistics warehouse, he had saved enough to join a quiet community where lawns were trimmed, sidewalks were spotless, and children played freely. He imagined barbecues, friendly neighbors, and perhaps even a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. But his welcome was nothing like he hoped. Just a week after moving in, Harold found a letter taped to his door from the Homeowners Association, signed by the president, Linda Marston. On the surface it was polite, but every line carried an edge. His mailbox, it said, did not match approved guidelines and must be repainted. Harold looked at the plain white mailbox, clean, simple, hardly offensive. But to Linda it was already an infraction. That was only the beginning. Within weeks he received notices about his trash bins being visible, his grass being too long, his hedges inconsistent with community standards. Other houses had bins outside and weeds in their lawns, but no letters appeared on their doors. Harold began to realize Linda wasn't just enforcing rules, she was targeting him. When he finally asked her why, she told him calmly that new residents were reviewed more closely to ensure they started off on the right foot. To Harold, it felt more like being watched. Trying to avoid trouble, he complied with every demand. He repainted his mailbox in an approved color, kept his bins hidden, even hired landscapers. Still, the notices multiplied. 2 bright porch lights, a garden hose in sight, endless nitpicking. Frustration turned into unease when Harold noticed neighbors watching him a little too closely, as though waiting for him to slip. At times he saw Linda sitting with other HOA board members, sipping coffee like generals planning their next campaign. One neighbor, Janet Ruiz, finally whispered a warning. Linda had been president for over a decade, and if she didn't like someone, she would make their life difficult. For reasons Harold couldn't understand, he was now her chosen target. The final straw came when he received a certified letter with a $250 fine for an unapproved decorative item. The item was nothing more than an American flag waving outside his home, a flag his father, a veteran, would have been proud to see. That night Harold stood on his porch, staring at the flag, his chest burned with anger and humiliation. Something told him this was no longer about rules at all. It was personal. So, quietly and deliberately, he installed hidden security cameras around his property. He told himself it was for peace of mind, but deep down he knew he was preparing for something bigger. He just didn't realize how far Linda was willing to go, or how valuable that footage would soon become. That flag wasn't just fabric to Harold, but now it had been deemed unapproved. The next morning, when he saw Linda making her rounds with her clipboard, he decided he'd had enough. "Linda," he called, walking down his driveway. She stopped, adjusted her glasses, and replied, "Yes, Mr. Jennings. I want to know why every little thing I do is a violation. A hose, a light bulb, a flag. No one else is getting these notices." Linda crossed her arms. "This neighborhood has standards. If you feel singled out, that is not my intention. But as president, it's my duty to maintain order." "Order?" Harold's voice rose. "You're harassing me, and I'm not the only one who sees it." Her expression hardened. "I'd advise you to choose your words carefully. These rules are for everyone's benefit. If you can't follow them, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." The conversation ended there, but Harold could feel neighbors peeking from blinds and curtains as he walked back to his house. That was the thing about these neighborhoods. Everyone saw everything, but nobody wanted to get involved. That night, replaying the argument in his head, Harold felt the walls of his home closing in. The place he had worked so hard to buy was already turning into a cage. When he checked his security footage later, he noticed something unsettling. Linda standing in his driveway after dark, staring at his house for several minutes before walking away. She hadn't noticed the small camera hidden near his porch light. Unease twisted in his stomach. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. The next confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon. Harold had just finished trimming his hedges when he saw Linda at the corner of the block, clipboard under her arm, inspecting properties like a general surveying troops. He felt his chest tighten. The notices, the fines, the stares, it all boiled over. He dropped his gloves, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped toward the sidewalk. "Linda," he called, his voice steady but firm. She turned, surprised by his tone. "Mr. Jennings," she said coolly. I trust you're keeping things in order today. I'm doing fine, Harold replied, stopping just a few feet from her. But we need to talk. Several neighbors paused their chores. A man washing his car let the hose run idle. Janet Ruiz peeked from behind her blinds. This time people weren't looking away. You've been hitting me with citations nonstop, Harold said. Mailbox, lawn, porch light, even my flag. I've done everything you asked, but the letters keep coming. What's really going on here? Linda pursed her lips. Mr. Jennings, you seem to think you're being treated differently. That is not the case. Every resident is expected to follow the guidelines. If you feel they're unfair, perhaps you should review your homeowner packet more closely. Don't talk down to me, Harold shot back. I've read every page, but I also see trash cans left out across the street. Grass higher than mine 3 doors down. Paint peeling on the house next to yours. Funny, I don't see letters on their doors. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Neighbors who had stayed silent for weeks now shifted uneasily. I will not stand here and justify every decision I make, Linda snapped. As president, I enforce the rules. If you'd like to bring concerns, you may attend the next board meeting. I don't need a meeting, Harold interrupted, his voice louder now. I need you to stop targeting me. That word, targeting, hung in the air like smoke. Richard Hanley, a man from down the block, finally spoke up. Maybe he's got a point, he muttered loud enough for all to hear. I've lived here 10 years. Left my bins out for days sometimes. Never got a notice. But Harold's been here, 2 months? And he's drowning in fines already. Doesn't add up. A few neighbors nodded in agreement while others looked away, unwilling to pick a side. Linda's face flushed. This is not a public debate. Mr. Jennings has received violations because he has not met the standards. End of story. No, Harold said firmly. Not end of story. Because I've started documenting everything, and I'll be ready to show it when the time comes. The mention of documentation caught her off guard. For a split second, uncertainty flickered in her eyes before she quickly composed herself. Do as you wish, she said coldly, turning to leave. But the rules will not change for you. The crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors whispering as they returned to their chores. Harold stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding. He hadn't planned to call her out in front of everyone, but once the words left his mouth, he didn't regret them. As he headed back to his house, Janet hurried over, her voice barely above a whisper. Be careful, Harold. She doesn't like being challenged. If you push too hard, she'll push back harder. Harold sighed. She already has. That night, Harold sat on his porch, his dog curled at his feet, staring at the invisible trench of tension that had opened between him and the HOA president. He knew Linda wasn't finished. He had seen it in her eyes before she walked away. But he didn't realize her next move wouldn't just be another notice taped to his door. It would involve tearing up the very ground around his home. 2 weeks passed after that public clash, and Harold noticed something strange. No new letters, no fines. No knocks from Linda. For a brief moment, he thought maybe calling her out in front of the neighbors had forced her to back off. He let himself breathe again, trimming the lawn on weekends, sipping coffee on the porch without waiting for the sound of paper flapping against the door. Then came the rumble. It was a Tuesday morning. Harold, coffee in hand and keys jingling, froze halfway down the driveway when he saw a flatbed truck parked at the end of the street. Workers in neon vests were unloading shovels, pickaxes, and orange construction cones. At the center of it all stood Linda, clipboard in hand, giving directions as if she owned the block. Harold approached cautiously. Morning. What's going on? She glanced at him with a tight smile. Drainage improvements. We've had complaints about water pooling during heavy rain. The board approved a trench system to direct runoff. Harold frowned. He had lived there almost 3 months and never seen water pooling near his property. Funny, he said. I haven't noticed any drainage issues. Linda clicked her pen against the clipboard. That's because you're new, Mr. Jennings. You haven't been here long enough to notice. Something in the way she said it made his stomach knot. The workers set up cones at the edge of his lawn and began digging. Shovels bit into the soil, carving a line along his property. Hold up, Harold said, stepping closer. How far is this trench going? Perimeter adjustments, Linda replied flatly. Completely standard. Nothing to worry about. It looks like it's circling my whole yard, Harold shot back. Coincidence, she said smoothly, though the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes told a different story. He stood stunned as the trench slowly wrapped around his property. When the crew reached his driveway, one of the workers hesitated. "Ma'am, you want us to cut through here too?" Linda nodded. "Yes, all the way." "Wait a minute," Harold snapped. "You're blocking my driveway." "Temporary inconvenience," she answered without looking at him. "For the greater good of the neighborhood." Neighbors began gathering on porches, watching the bizarre scene. Some whispered behind their hands, others pretended to water plants just to get a better look. Across the street, Janet Ruiz crossed her arms, her face tight with worry. "This is harassment," Harold shouted. "You can't just tear up my yard like this." Linda turned slowly, her voice calm but sharp. "Mr. Jennings, everything we're doing has been approved by the HOA board. If you'd like to contest it, bring it up at the next meeting. Until then, I suggest stepping aside." One of the workers looked at Harold. "Sir, you want us to stop?" Harold opened his mouth, then shut it again. If he said yes, Linda would twist it into non-compliance. If he said nothing, his property would be surrounded like a castle with a moat. His fists clenched. "Do your job," he muttered to the worker, glaring at Linda. "This isn't over." The digging went on all day. By evening, Harold's house looked absurd. 3 sides surrounded by a trench, his driveway nearly impossible to use without driving over a mound of dirt. He stood silently as the crew packed up, Linda thanking them sweetly before retreating to her spotless 2-story home. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He wandered from window to window, staring at the damage lit faintly by street lamps. If she could get away with this, what was next? Would she find him for fixing it? Demand he pay for repairs? But Linda had overlooked one thing: his cameras. Harold opened his laptop, pulled up the security feed, and clicked through the footage. The cameras had caught everything. Linda pointing to where the trench should go, directing the workers toward his driveway, arms crossed as if orchestrating an attack. His anger hardened into determination. She thought she had outsmarted him, but she hadn't counted on the fact that he was already recording every move. Still, Harold wasn't ready to reveal his hand. The real test would come when the neighborhood itself had to choose whose side they were on. The next morning, the sight hit him all over again. His house looked less like a home and more like a construction site abandoned mid-project. The trench scarred the earth along the property line, raw dirt piled high in uneven mounds. His driveway was half blocked, forcing him to angle his truck like a puzzle piece just to back out. Arms crossed, his dog tugging at the leash beside him, Harold glanced across the street. Janet gave him a sympathetic wave but didn't dare come closer. 2 doors down, Richard Hanley muttered something to his wife before disappearing inside. Neighbors noticed, but nobody wanted to be caught taking Harold's side. "They're scared of her," Harold muttered under his breath.